Welcome to Mishna study Masechet Pesahim, Perek Aleph Mishnah Vav. Over here in this Mishnah, we're going to discuss a great Mishnah of Tumah and Tahara, and it's an interesting mahloket and really a great, learning experience to really understand a lot of the laws of Tumah and Tahara. We're going to jump into a bunch of it now, and hopefully have a good grasp of it at the end of this Mishnah. So I'm going to be Hanina Segan Kohanim. Comes in Hanina, right? This is kind of Kohanim, and he says, "Mimehen shel Kohanim, from the early days of the Kohanim, lo nimne'u milisrof et habasar shenitna bevlad hatumah im habasar shenitma be'av hatumah." Right? So he says, look, they never stopped, they never prevented themselves, the Kohanim. Right? Kohanim were always careful with the mitzvot that they did. They never prevented themselves from burning korban meat, right? Sacrificial meat that became tameh from a vlad hatumah. Right over here, a vlad tumah could either be a rishon or a sheni, right? A first level or second level tumah. Over here, we're talking about it being a sheni, right? So it was nitma, it became tameh from a sheni. So what is this basar, right? This meat now becomes a shelishi. With, let's say, would they burn this with this meat with other meat? Ima basar shenitma be'av hatumah, with other meat that became tameh from an avatuma, right? From a the father of tumot. And that meat is a rishon. So what are they doing? They're taking meat that's a rishon, that's a first level tumah, and they're burning it with meat that's a shelishi, a third level tumah. Now what happens when they both touch? The third level tumah becomes a sheni. It goes up a status because it just touched a rishon. It just touched a first level, right? So this is interesting. It's just important to just know the levels of tumah and tahara. You have, let's say, a dead person, right? They're dead. They're the ultimate tumah. Someone that touches that dead person, they become an ava tumah, the father of tumah. If they touch something, they touch another person, that other person becomes a rishon, a first level. That rishon touches something, that other item becomes a sheni, becomes a second level. Foods can become a sheni midrabanan. Right? Foods can become sheni midoraita. They could also become sheni midrabanan if they become tameh from other foods. Right? Other foods make foods tameh only midrabanan at a sheni level. And then if something else touches it, let's say it touches that sheni touches truma, that truma becomes a shilishi. Right? This is really reserved for truma because of its sanctified status. It can become a shilishi. And you know what? Besar kodashim, a korban, could even become a revi'i, fourth level. Right, so that's the gradation of levels of tumah. And over here we see that Rabbi Hanina is saying that look, the Kohanim would burn level 1 and a level 3 together, and it didn't bother them that the level 1 was going to become a level 2. And even though we're adding tumah, we're adding the level 3 is going to become a level 2. Even though we're adding tumah, we're making it a higher level tumah. It didn't matter. Right? It's important to point out that this shilishi, when it's becoming a sheni, it's only becoming sheni midrabanan, right? Because again, as we pointed out, food doesn't really become tameh mideoraita at a second level from another food, right? So if a rishon touches it, it'll only become a sheni midrabanan, and therefore they were allowed to go ahead and do that. Now, Hosif Rabbi Akiva comes Rabbi Akiva and he adds, "Is mimehen shel kohanim lo nimneu miladlik tashemen shnifsa b'tful yom bener shritma bitmemet." Right? So firstly, before we jump into this, I just want to point out that a dead person, if someone goes and touches a dead person, if I go and touch a dead person, I become an avatuma. Right? But the next item that I touch, right? Let's say I touch a sword. Right? I use a sword because that's what the pasuk uses, or other kleshetif, I touch clothing. I touch, clothing. Okay? So now the clothing that I touch becomes a rishon. I became an av. The clothing becomes a rishon. Let's say vice versa. Let's say the sword was touching the dead body. Right? The sword is an avatuma. I come and touch that sword. I still become an avatuma. Right? You see, there's a higher level of tumah to the keli that touches the dead person, and also vice versa. If I went ahead and right, I touch that person, I'm a av. I go ahead and touch a kli, a sword. That sword doesn't become rishon; it also becomes an av. Right? Sorry, I may mix that up before. It also becomes an av, as opposed to if I go ahead and touch the dead person, I become an avatuma. If I go ahead and touch another person, right? I touch another person, that other person becomes a rishon. So if I'm touching a keli, I touch clothing, that keli becomes an av. If I touch another person, that other person becomes a rishon. Okay, that's we learn from the pasuk bahal al cherev o bemet. Right, so we learn cherev hareu kehalal. Right, the same way the sword ends up taking on the status of the halal, and therefore when I touch the sword, even though I didn't touch that person, I'm still an avatuma. So now what does Rabbi Akiva come and he say? So he says, Mimahen shel Kohanim, from the times of the Kohanim, lo nimneu miladlik shemen shnimsa b'tful yom. We didn't prevent ourselves from burning oil. We had oil that became tameh from a tvul yom. A tvul yom is always a sheni latuma. So now this oil became a shlishi, a third level. And what are we going to burn it in? Bener, in a candle. Now we're not talking about a klehitis, because klehitis can never become an avatuma, right? Or even, right? Shnitzma b'tmemet, right? This candle became tameh from a tememet. So this candle is now what? This candle is a rishon. It became tameh from a tememet. So now this candle itself is a rishon. So now what are we going and doing? We're burning oil, that's a shlishi, in a candle, that's a rishon. No, sorry, the candle is not a rishon. The candle is an av, because in the introduction that I gave before, if I go ahead and touch a dead person, I become an avatuma. And if I touch another keli, that keli stays as an av. It doesn't go down a level to a rishon. It stays an av. So this candle itself, right, if it's a candle that's made out of metal, that's an avatuma. So now what do? I'm burning this oil in an avatuma. So now what does this oil become? It goes from a shlishi, it's not jumping up to a sheni, it's jumping up to a rishon. This oil is becoming a rishon because it's coming in contact with something that's an av hatumah. Now, Rabbi Akiva is adding this because he's saying you're allowed to even add more, right? You're allowed to go ahead and burn oil and change it from a shlishi, not just to a sheni, but you're turning this oil from a shlishi into a rishon. Now, what's important, just as I mentioned, just to end off, even though you're adding tuma onto the status. Now, what Rabbi Akiva is saying, that we're talking about a candle that's an avatuma, so you can make the oil that is shon, and it'll become tameh mideoraita according to him, because he holds that mashkin, liquids tameim, can make other foods tameh mideoraita according to him, and he wants to set this up in a case where you can make it tameh mideoraita. But if he held it was derabanan, which is true, that's how we hold that foods can only make and liquids can only make something tameh mideorabanan. Then he could have set it up now in our case with our Mishna with the tumah derabanan, and he could have set it up in the case of an oil, a candle that was made out of pottery. Because any liquids that become tameh, we know liquids in general jump back up a status. Anytime a liquid touches something that's tameh, the liquids automatically become a rishon, right? That's midrabanan, right? So if I have, even if my hands are sheni latuma and I touch water, that water becomes, instead of becoming a shlishi, it'll become a rishon. All this is true. Both these statements are true. The statement of Rabbi Hanina and Kohanim and the statement of Rabbi Akiva, they're both true according to Rambam because they're both iduyot. They're both testimonies that they spoke about from the time of the Beit HaMikdash.